Welcome to Restorers, a Water Street Mission podcast. Over these upcoming minutes, we'll be speaking with heroes in Lancaster County and beyond who are making a positive impact on men and women experiencing homelessness and poverty. Each episode, we'll speak with an expert from the community, as well as one of our own Water Street Mission staff members, to learn more about how each of them are working to make a difference locally. Without further ado, let's dive right in.
Welcome to episode 3 of our podcast. We're really excited that you've joined us, and hopefully you'll be encouraged, educated, and entertained by our conversation today. We're going to be talking a little bit about mental health and some of our guests and people experiencing homelessness. And I'm really excited today to have Rebecca Dempsey joining us. Rebecca is a licensed professional counselor with WellSpan Philhaven, and we are privileged to have her work directly with Water Street for the last 3 years.
Yes.
Rebecca's been working at Water Street, specifically coming alongside our guests and walking with them on their journeys. And it's a great partnership. We're so grateful to WellSpan Philhaven for working with us, providing this support and service to our guests. And Rebecca's been a great addition to our team.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. And again, many people, think about the things that contribute to and lead to homelessness and the challenges that individuals experiencing homelessness have. And one of them, it's been in the news, it's, people are well aware, the interaction of mental health, mental illness, and homelessness.
Yes.
And so I've seen rates published all across the spectrum, anywhere from 3% schizophrenia to 60% schizophrenia, which I don't know how they do some of that work, but the most reliable statistics that I've seen quoted again and again is around 25% of people experiencing homelessness that have a serious mental illness, and then up to 45% with a diagnosed mental illness. Right. As you've worked with our guests, as you've worked in the community and in other places through your career, how do those numbers hit you, and does it feel accurate, and what have you seen?
Yeah, I would say that that's true to my experience here, and also some other statistics, I guess, is among those people with diagnoses in the mental health realm, around 40% of those people have traumatic brain injuries, which often looks like mental health issue. And so that can be treated differently. It can be seen differently. Okay. And it just kind of complicates the issue if you don't know that there's traumatic brain injury.
If you're coming alongside somebody with a lingering mental illness,
right,
it's going to be a very different treatment plan,
yes, different
approach, and even how they respond to you, even though it might look the same, traumatic brain injury is a very different thing.
Right. It's a whole different set of treatment and intervention. Yeah.
I could see how not getting that clear from the beginning could be really hard.
Right.
It's
a standard part of my intake that I will ask, have you ever had a concussion? Have you ever hit your head? Did you play football? Did you ever have a car accident? I'll ask those questions just to kind of get a sense about the potential.
That's great. Have you encountered that at all before with our guests here at Water Street, where maybe they came in expecting, or you were expecting, to be dealing with a specific mental illness diagnosis, and then realized, wait a minute, this is something different?
Yes. Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, because there's often an explosive anger associated with TBI. And so they often show up at my office as a referral for, hey, they need some anger management, And there's, so when I ask those questions, it's like, no, I think you need to have a neurological exam, and I refer you for that.
Wow.
And we've run into some folks who didn't know.
Yeah. What a critical insight that feels so important to me, because recognizing here at Water Street, we can have 200, 220, 230 people living on campus at the same time.
Right.
And behavioral issues when you're living in a congregate space like that, sharing a room with 40 sometimes in our shelter.
Yeah.
Those kind of issues, to really know what's the genesis, what's the root behind it, feels very important to me.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, because it just adds to their frustration when folks, have an expectation around them to be able to manage these behaviors when they don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to me, that's one of the great blessings of having you with us, of having a team in our residential ministries staff that understands some of those clinical differences, and even if they're not licensed counselors themselves, have somebody they can turn to say, what are we really seeing here, and how can we walk with somebody? Yeah. When we're thinking about big picture of helping somebody emerge from homelessness and try to develop some a pathway forward and out of homelessness into their own home, addressing those mental health issues are such a critical part of it. I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit about how you've seen somebody maybe overcome a wall that had been there in their experience prior to working with you and being at Water Street and having that time and space to really stabilize some of their mental health issues.
Sure. My experience has been, especially with folks in the resident program who are here for a longer period of time, it takes a while to connect with them to a place where they feel safe to work on recovery in the mental health sense. So there's often insights that kind of go along that are painful for these folks. And it's painful for anybody to recognize, I've been contributing to, and this is how.
Right.
Or my past has been contributing to my issues. So there's a lot of uncovering and recognizing connections between the past and now, and how that's perpetuated some difficulties in their lives. So, and that happens over the course of therapy with folks. Here, I'm privileged to be able to do some more traditional in-depth, and I often see folks every week.
Yeah.
There's some folks I've seen since I've been here for 3 years, every week.
Wow.
And kind of just now, maybe in the past year, kind of getting to some core beliefs that they've carried and kind of figured out they're not working for me, and maybe they're not true.
Right.
So it's a lot of that, and
yeah, and it's a long journey, and it's a journey that's going to go on beyond their time at Water Street as well. Right. Lord willing, they're going to stay connected, whether it's with you or finding a new counselor as they leave to help them on that journey. I think it's really important for those who are interested in what Water Street does to understand. It's not just about, providing a stable place for a couple weeks and helping them get a job and some income and the keys to a new apartment, because some of those issues, if they're left lingering and never dealt with, crop back up again. Yeah,
sure. I mean, they're ingrained patterns, and patterns of behavior. There's research at this point that patterns of behavior actually cause structural change in the brain. It's like a cow path. If you continue doing the same behavior over and over again, it becomes entrenched, and it's easy to stay in that. It's hard to get out of a cow path. So that's what therapy is about, is identifying when you're in the cow path and working really hard to make a new one.
Yeah.
And so it's identifying those patterns that haven't worked for them and doing the hard work of catching it and trying some new stuff. Right. And being patient with themselves and having some self-compassion in it, because first of all, it's painful to recognize them, and it's very difficult to change patterns. So,
I like that image. That's
I use the cow path a lot.
It's a great, because it makes sense.
You're in a rut, and you
find that easier path because that's what you've always done.
Right.
You've
so
worn
if you
it down
haven't
so well.
created a new cow path, and you return to community without supports, what cow path you're working on.
Right.
There's an inertia. It's just a return to old patterns.
Wow. Yeah. As we think about kind of maybe a shift of topic a little bit here, there can be almost a chicken and egg type of scenario, right? Where we do recognize that mental illness or mental health issues can lead to homelessness. Usually, I mean, not in and of themselves, but because of behaviors that come out of that, poor coping styles that are developed there, eventually it leads down a path that can lead to homelessness. So many people may experience homelessness because of their mental illness. But we also find that the stress of being homeless, the trauma of being homeless, of living on the streets, of living in your car, of couch surfing and not knowing where you're going to be from day to day, can also lead to mental health issues.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit to that dynamic that, yes, mental illness can lead to homelessness, but also homelessness can be a negative influence on our mental health?
Right. So if someone has had we've heard a lot about the ACEs study, adverse childhood experiences. So the idea that the more trauma or traumatic experiences children go through in the first few years of their lives, they're more likely not only to have poor health outcomes, but also to have poor relationship issues, poor engagement in managing daily life stressors,
Right.
and that kind of thing. So they take that with them, as we all do, and when they're experience more trauma in their adulthood, particularly homelessness, that exacerbates anything that's already underlying there. So we're often kind of trying to tease it out. What is it from childhood that you experienced that kind of formed those core beliefs that you're holding on to, and therefore interpret everything around you within that lens. And then what have your adult experiences with trauma done to contribute to that?
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're in a stable environment, some of those early childhood experiences, you may have enough mitigating supports that are going to help you manage through.
Right.
But when those supports are stripped away, when you're faced with, the crisis of homelessness,
Right.
suddenly it starts reemerging.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we go back to those statistics from the beginning. 25% diagnosed with a serious mental illness, 45% with a diagnosed mental illness. What percentage, may have undiagnosed?
Oh, yeah.
Or may have
absolutely.
a kind of a tendency towards having some of these mental health issues in the right environment. And so that's where I think often I hear those statistics and I'm like, yes, but at the same time, they may be vastly underestimating what we experience.
Yeah.
I know at Water Street, we actually created with our guests, especially in shelter, we've come up basically with a label, for lack of a better term, where when we identify somebody with serious mental illness, we want to make sure that the way we hold them accountable to behaviors and things that happen on campus is different. We want to carry it through the lens of this is what they're really dealing with.
Right.
So they might have a different level of expectation and accountability, and we call them our Thrive guests.
Yes.
And at one point, when we came up with that designation of Thrive guests, we thought, out of our shelter population, maybe it'll be 25%, right? Because that's the statistic.
Yeah. Closer to 100, right?
Yeah.
Well, nearing that anyway, sure.
And then we, as we start moving forward and we're working with you, we're working with our case managers and some of our other clinically trained people to identify who should be identified as a Thrive guest. I remember looking into our numbers one day, and we were at like 65% of our shelter guests were identified as Thrive guests. And we're like, so they're supposed to be the exception, but maybe that needs to be the new norm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the patterns of behaviors, like especially with interpersonal skills, keep people from holding jobs. And in the Thrive program, they can work on that interpersonal stuff in vivo. Whereas the resident program is different; it's a different focus.
Right.
And so when folks are trying to reestablish themselves in community, building those skills around interpersonal relationships that have been affected by mental health issues, or even just early childhood experiences, not getting the tools. Nobody around them knows how to do this, so they can't teach it to them.
Right.
So it's relearning and practicing in those environments, and it's a great. When you started doing that, I was like, "This is great. This is awesome."
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things. Before we started the podcast, we were talking a little bit about viewing the mission, viewing a guest time here at Water Street as almost a laboratory.
Yes.
Where they can get new tools, test them out, and try them, see how they work, with a safety net around them.
Right.
And I feel like that's such a critical piece, especially when we're dealing with, and one of the things we're trying to grow in at Water Street, we're not there yet, is to be better informed across all of our services around mental health issues. And I think your presence here is a huge help to that. Having some key staff members who are clinically trained is really helpful, so that our Step Up program, which is around job training and coaching and everything, can understand better how to walk with somebody with a mental illness into the workforce.
And I've seen a number of guests who, Step Up program, I know they the mission forms relationships with employers. And so part of that is helping employers understand trauma-informed care and can have trauma-informed approaches. And therefore, when they have a guest working for them who maybe is struggling with those cow paths, they can recognize it and support them through it rather than just fire them.
Yeah. And we're so grateful for those partners we're building on that Step Up side.
Yeah.
Because,
and I've seen it over and over with guests who, are starting out with some part-time employment with some employer partners who do struggle. They'll struggle with attendance because they're feeling like they don't feel confident in the job. They don't feel worthy of the job, or even worthy of being seen as worthy of the compassion that goes with that and understanding. Yeah. So they're not used to accepting that.
Wow. You mentioned, you said a phrase that I think people have heard. It's a buzzword that's talked about all the time in social services, but all over the place nowadays, and that's trauma-informed care.
Yeah.
Could you explain that a little bit to us?
Sure, and it has become very pop culturized.
Yeah.
Media can get a hold of it, and then it kind of gets watered down, and people don't really understand. So, and psychology has a history, of having buzzwords and trends and stuff like that.
Right.
But the reason why trauma is so important to understand is the structural effect on the brain and the neuroplasticity or the ability for that to change with intervention. So when you experience a traumatic event, and it can be anything, one person can experience an event as traumatic and another person have the same event and not.
Right.
Some people can spontaneously recover, and some people need years and years of help with that. So a traumatic event imprints the experience on the brain as a fight or flight experience. So they're in mortal danger,
right?
And they often are. Whether it's an abusive situation as a child, or a traumatic event like a car accident, or coming close to death, or Hurricane Katrina or something like that.
Right.
So it's imprinted as a set of sensory experiences, and then it puts them in fight or flight mode, and then as they move through life, they can be triggered by something in the environment or internally that will bring that experience back as if it's happening right now, and therefore they're back in fight and flight mode.
So the reaction to the current event is informed by something that happened way back here, and can elevate that fight or flight mode.
Right. Yeah. When in reality they're not in danger.
Right.
So the idea of treatment, the treatment involves separating the memory or the event from the response now.
Okay. So that they
So it's just a bad memory.
Yeah.
Bad memories are.
Right.
And you don't have to have an
you
elevated
don't have the
response
visceral,
to it.
Physical, emotional reaction in the same way. Wow.
And that's what triggering is about. I mean, it's not about something that happens that just upsets you.
Yeah.
It has to do with...
My kids trigger me all the time.
Right. We're all triggered by everything.
Right.
But triggering in a trauma sense has to do with something happens and you are back in it as if it's happening again right now.
Yeah.
And you can't... It
and your mind
disengages
can't,
the cognitive processes. You cannot think through it. You're in fight and flight.
Yeah.
The limbic system engages.
Right.
You're not thinking.
And when you're in fight or flight mode, you can't think logically.
You can't.
Think about the consequences of my behavior in this moment. And so that's where...
It's not a willingness. Your brain does that.
Yeah.
You cannot think through it.
And understanding that. So being a trauma-informed campus is, having a deeper understanding across all levels. Not that we're all experts in trauma,
Right.
but that we can respond in a way to people's behaviors with an understanding that maybe this isn't this isn't something they've thought through. It may be a visceral reaction that they can't control to trauma from their past.
Right.
So how do we then walk with them through it? How do we unpack the moment?
Yeah.
How do we help them get support? And then how do we walk with them going forward so that we're not just, oh, this person reacted poorly, they're out.
Right.
We want to make sure we can walk
and
with
that,
people.
it really only takes knowing a few interventions, a few different skills. One is helping, reminding people to breathe. Breathing actually physically re-engages the cognitive systems in the brain. So that's when you can say, just breathe. I'm going to count to 10 and breathe, and that will re-engage.
Wow.
So if your folks only know, if your support folks only know that one, that's enough.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. One other thing I wanted to tap into today and lean into your expertise on, we understand that when people are experiencing homelessness, especially when they're on the street, they're kind of in survival mode.
Yes.
And can be in survival mode for a long time where you're worried about, where am I going to sleep tonight? Where's my next meal going to come from? Am I safe in this space? Kind of looking over your shoulder, worried about assault, worried about all kinds of things. When you live in survival mode, whether it be for 2 or 3 days, 2 or 3 months, or as some of our long-term homeless in this community, 2, 3, 4, 10 years, you're living in survival mode. How does that change the way somebody thinks, how somebody responds to opportunities, and even being able to think about the future?
Right. So a lot of it has to do with folks are hypervigilant all the time, so they're always looking for the threat. And you talked about people who live on the street and having to kind of protect themselves and look for, is somebody going to steal something from me tonight? Am I going to get assaulted tonight? I can't sleep then. I have to stay awake. So then, the not having sleep affects their ability to function. It does anybody not having enough sleep.
Right.
So things like that, not feeling relaxed enough to sleep, not feeling safe enough to, it's always being engaged in that adrenaline cortisol mix that is not only unhealthy medically, but also it affects the functioning of the brain. So they come here and they're in that survival mode.
Yeah.
And so anything that happens in the environment is perceived as a threat or a potential threat.
Okay.
So it's hard to engage. Healing can only happen in a safe, stable, emotionally safe environment.
Yeah.
So if they're not experiencing emotional safety, there's no healing. There's just survival.
Yeah. Well, that's a great lead into actually the next conversation that we're going to have on this episode with one of our staff here about how do we create that safe space, knowing that people are coming out of this unsafe environment and where their minds are constantly active and in that, whether it's fight or flight mode from the recent traumas in their lives or whether it's that survival mode of looking out for threats at all times. How do we help them take those first steps? Create some safety for them so that we can get to a place where we can work on healing and looking forward to the future. Well, those insights are so helpful, Rebecca. I really appreciate you sharing with us today, and even more so, just your involvement with our guests has been such a blessing to Water Street, to the guests' experience and their walk and journey, and I know so many of our guests value their time with you. Thank you for being a part of Water Street, and thank you to Wellspan Philhaven for allowing you to work with us. Really appreciate you and appreciate you taking your time to share with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to give a profound thanks to our Season 1 podcast sponsor, Rogers & Associates, who's helping us tremendously in this first year of the Restores podcast. They're a wealth management firm that helps clients become financially independent for retirement. You can learn more about them online at rogers-associates.com or by calling 717-560-3800. That's Rogers, RODGERS-associates.com or by calling 717-560-3800. Thank you so much, Rogers & Associates. Welcome back. We're really excited to get into the second part of our conversation today about mental health and stabilization. And we're really excited as we transition now to our second guest is Twana Reed. And Twana is our Director of Access and Case Management at Water Street. She's been with Water Street for about 5 years as a case manager and now in this leadership role. And just super appreciative of Twana's work, her heart for our guests, and that she's joining us today to talk about this.
Thank you for having me, Jack.
Yeah. Could you start, Twana, tell us a little bit about Director of Access and Case Management. What does that mean? What is it that you're overseeing and helping with at Water Street?
I oversee the case management team, which is anything that comes in for intake. In my department, we intake them and we approve for services so they have access to services. Our case management team is the team that follows them while they're at Water Street and puts plans in place, supportive services, things of need we put in place for them.
Awesome. And a part of that case management team, we actually have a couple positions called liaisons. Yes. Can you explain what a liaison is?
Our liaison are mental health clinicians. They are master's level professionals who, from day one, they follow them for the first 7 days of stabilization, making touch points along the way so that our guests don't feel like they're lost in the system. They are always in the system. You know, they've been told their story a million times. Here we are to say, we see you, we hear you, and we'll put in place what you need.
Excellent, excellent. And yeah, coming off of our conversation with Rebecca, we were talking about just how many of our guests, and we don't want to perpetuate a stereotype. Not everybody who experiences homelessness is experiencing homelessness has mental health issues. Right. But the reality is there are a significant number out there. And we talked about statistics, anywhere from 25% with significant mental illness up to 45% with a diagnosed mental illness. And Rebecca and I both said, yeah, that reflects kind of the reality of what we see. I know when we set aside our Thrive designation for our guests in shelter, those who have significant mental health issues where we may need to navigate accountability differently for them. That number, when we first set it up, we thought, yeah, that'll be the minority. We might have 30% who will be Thrive guests. And then suddenly we looked up. I know one day I looked and it was like 65% of our guests.
Yeah. A lot of our guests right now are holding that Thrive status because we realize they're not going to get their self out of homelessness. In the 30 or 60 days, they need more time for us to put the supports in place necessary for them to thrive in the environment of receiving a home.
So it's not as simple as just find an apartment, get a job, and you're going to be good. There's other deeper-rooted issues.
Absolutely.
Specifically diagnosable mental health. Yes. Yeah. And we made that transition, and I'm going to ask you to kind of lean into this a little bit to explain that first week of life at Water Street. We realize we're trying to understand who the guest is, their unique journey, and how they got here. But that can't be done in a day. So we've set up what we're calling a stabilization phase. Could you talk to us about what the value of that stabilization, like what is that all about and what's the value of it?
Oh my gosh, there's so much value into it because when someone comes in the door, like I said, they haven't been seen or heard. And we are very intentional building relationship with them. There are 3 safe people that they're going to meet along the way: a case manager, a life coach, and maybe a friend or someone here. It could even be our Laureate, our food service director, but 3 people they encounter that they feel is safe and they can build relationship with. And in that time, we often feel like their circumstance, even their mental health, will be displayed in those first 7 days because sometimes they don't know about their mental health. They just know they're dealing with this problem and what is it? I haven't had it addressed. And the relationships that are formed are just very influential in their journey because they remember that you took the time to get me what I needed, to sit down and talk to me about it.
And that's one of the roles that the liaisons play.
Yes.
As you mentioned, they're clinically trained.
Yes.
And they're going to specifically spend that first 7 days with them. So what are they looking for? How is that different than sitting down and doing, a questionnaire assessment for a guest? How does that help increase the value?
Observations. Sometimes the behaviors, we're partnering with our life coaches, our team that see them on different shifts and saying, what do you see? We're reading notes. We're encountering, we're going to find them, we're meeting them where they are to sit down and have a conversation. Because a lot of them will go to the park, they'll take a walk. Right. We'll take a walk. Right. We're doing things outside the box here because sometimes you have to go on their level and in their areas to meet them where they are to say, okay, I see this. And then we're also partnering with other agencies because sometimes, yes, they do have an ICM in the community.
And those kind of conversations can't happen in 24 hours. We're not going to be able to track down all the other case managers they may engage with. it's laughable to me sometimes, maybe because we've been around long enough, the idea that you can sit down and do an assessment intake and get completely verifiable factual information with somebody you've never met before.
No.
There's no trust established, but we're going to go through this questionnaire and tell me about the most vulnerable moments in your life.
And we don't. We
Right.
went away from that. The mini intake is it's less intrusive. It's having a conversation and not asking all those questions that we don't have the right to ask, and that's not fair to them. And they don't want to tell you right away. But when you build relationship, you learn that they'll tell you exactly what you need to get them the services.
And that can happen over the time
7
of that
days,
first week.
Yep.
Yeah, that's so cool. When that concept was brought to the table and we were looking at the flaws in our old model
Right.
and why we would transition to this, it just, once you hear it, it makes so much sense. Are there any stories you could tell of where maybe somebody who came in and was presenting a certain way on day one, that maybe in the old model, if we had only had that day of kind of assessment and then now we're going to come up with a plan, we would have had a completely different story than having that week where we discover over time through behavior and through relationship?
It was a story that just happened recently with a mom. She has 4 children, and she's used to displaying anger and used to hostility. And actually, it was directed towards me. She really let me have it out front. And then I seen her last week, and she's totally different. She's met, life coaches and case managers, and she said, I want to try residential. I've done it this way. I've been angry all my life. I've had trauma all my life, but here is where somebody started to care for me. And she even said to me, Ms. Tawana, you just walked away from me. She said, you didn't engage me. She said, I was used to someone saying, come on. And she was like, no. And she said the next day, yes.
Answering anger with anger.
And I said, well, I used to be that person, so I know. So I said, no. And then she said, the next day you just said, good morning. And I said, yeah. And I called her by name. And she was like, you called me by name. And she said, after I said all those awful things to you, you called me by name. You said hello to my children. And then we had the June Jamboree. And I was out there cheering her kids on while they were pie eating. And she was like, that was amazing. She was like, I'm loved here. And I said, yeah, you are. So, yeah, it's those stories where you see someone at their most vulnerable and you're not used to seeing that, but you know where it's coming from. And you walk alongside them, and the transformation is there. It is absolutely incredible. That's my favorite part of this job.
That's so
the
cool
transformation
to hear.
that happens.
Yeah. And having that time to build trust. So for those who don't know, at Water Street, as guests come in and they're looking for assistance and services who are experiencing homelessness, there's kind of 2 tracks that they can choose from. There's the shelter track, which is really oriented towards outward goals. Finding housing, finding stable employment to pay for the housing. And it's kind of all about your time here is focused on how do I get out successfully and have a stable landing spot as best we can in a short period of time. And then there's residential, which is much more about I know there are deeper issues that have helped contribute to why I'm here, and I want to take the time to dig into those, whether it's mental health, physical health, relational collapses, vocational issues where you just haven't been able to find stability there, addictions, all those things where you can take more time and set up a plan. In the old model, again, we're doing our assessment and they move into shelter, and it's kind of like you got to make a choice. Whereas that 7-day period allows for what? What happens that helps? Yeah.
Transformation. I was here when we did the action plans in shelter, and you didn't get a chance to build relationship. You didn't truly get a chance to understand them. Here you're throwing all that on them, and they can't handle that. They've been through so much, and they needed to stabilize and get some structure and learn structure. And then for somebody to walk alongside them during that time of getting structure, what does that look like in my life? How do I do this? I can't do this. We're so used to doing structure that we don't understand when someone doesn't have it, and that's not fair to expect everyone to be the same, but here we're doing it a lot differently, and I love it.
So it makes me think as well, having that stabilization phase, the reality, even if our guests don't have pre-existing mental health issues, the experience of homelessness in itself, as we were talking with Rebecca, there's trauma there, whether they've been on the street and in that survival mode for a period of time, or just the trauma of losing housing, breakdown of relationships, collapse financially, whatever the triggering event was, that trauma does something to our ability to think ahead and plan. And stabilization phase, that 7 days, allows for that space for them as well. I mean, have you seen that play out?
Because they're so used to they're in survival mode when they come in. They're grieving a home, they're grieving something because they had to give it up to come to Water Street. But when they get to just breathe, and we say that when I go into intake, I tell my team, I said, make sure you tell them this is our love on stage. We're going to love on you. We're going to love you so well here. So we don't expect anything from you. And you could feel shoulders going down. You could feel, because they are expecting you. In order for me to get something, I have to give something. No, we're not asking you to give something. We're asking you just to let us love on you, build a relationship with you. And then the stabilization, to have nothing to do after you're thinking, like, where's my home? How am I going to eat? And then you have kids. If you have kids, it's even worse because you're thinking about other people besides yourself. So to be given time to just exhale and say, let me just stay in the moment and just think about this moment. What can I do this moment? Just breathe.
And what a gift that is. In the midst of crisis,
absolutely,
to have somebody say, we're going to take care of this.
Yeah.
All you have to do is breathe.
Yeah.
Just breathe. We're going to be here, support you. And then out here, we're going to start talking about how we can start rebuilding, but it's not now.
I've seen people cry. I remember when we were doing COVID precautions, we had these little gift bags, and I gave a gentleman a gift bag. He opened it up. It had like candy. We had socks and everything. And he started to cry. And I was like taken back, and I said, are you okay? And he said, I needed these socks. You don't know how bad I needed these socks. And I said, wow. I said, well, let me give you another pair. So, for them to not being asked to do anything, you fill out a form, it's just sign your name. And then we're building the relationship, whether, like I said, a handshake, a walk, whatever it is to come check on you. You would be surprised when we walk through that dining hall door to do touch points, how people run up to us and run up to the life coaches because they want us. They trust us now. And that's not something we take lightly. We earn that trust, and it's our right to guard that trust, and we do. And that's how we build relationship.
And I'm sensing the trust goes both ways,
Absolutely.
too, because, again, when you put somebody in an uncomfortable, demanding situation at the beginning of your relationship, can you really believe what they're saying?
And they don't. And they come to us and say, you really meant that. Because I've said to people, like, afterwards, a couple of days later, oh, I love you. And then when they meet me, like months later, Ms. Tawana, you really meant you love me. And I do. I do mean it. I don't say it lightly. I do. Because sometimes they've never heard that. The first time they heard it is from one of us.
Wow.
And that's crazy for us to think that no one's heard that. But it's important for them to hear that because you don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah, and then demonstrating that love by the way we can.
Do. Yeah. We love well.
That's awesome. Well, Tawana, thank you so much.
Thank you for having
not
me,
just
Jack.
for joining us today, but for everything you're doing, you and your team, and caring for our guests when they come through the door.
Thank you very much.
It's so powerful, and it lays that foundation for all that God's going to do while somebody's with us. So I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today with Rebecca and Tawana and gotten a little more insight into the world that we're walking in and the guests that we're walking with. And we appreciate your interest and your support of the work God is doing here at Water Street. So thank you.